Welcome to Midweek Musing for Wednesday the 24th of June. One of the things that we've recognised as a nation over the last few weeks and months is the idea of key workers. Those who are necessary for our economy to keep moving, those we rely on for health and the provision of vital services. It was something the government talked about very early on in the days of the lockdown as it started, so that those who were doing things that were recognised as of particular significance were allowed to continue to go out and do those jobs, as opposed to the rest of us who needed to stay home. And there were a whole list of people who were included. Those working in health and social care, those involved in education, those involved in delivering public services, providing food in shops and where food is grown, those who are selling other essential goods, people involved in security, transport, utility companies, those responsible for waste disposal, for funerals, for church ministers, and for more. There was a list of people. And one of the things that we've recognised as this crisis developed, as it unfolded, is that many of those people, now recognised as key and critical to our way of living, are in low-paid jobs, have been struggling to make ends meet, and are not really recognised for the contribution they make to our society. And one of the questions that's arisen from this is whether, after this current crisis is over, we will seek to adjust that imbalance, and that those who are now recognised as so critical and important to us all are treated more fairly. And many people are arguing for this and believe that it's right, that in this, as in so many things, we cannot go back to the way things were. Psalm 72 speaks into similar situations. It starts by calling on God to give the king. There's the idea of a coronation, maybe a new king taking on his rule in the country, and praying that God would give this king a sense of justice, that he would rule rightly and fairly. And as we think about this psalm, it'd be useful to have it open so you can refer to it. And throughout the psalm, the plight of those who are struggling is recognised, and there are calls for them to be helped and blessed. Verse 2 speaks about the need for justice for the afflicted. Verse 4 carries on with that theme. It talks about defending the afflicted, caring for the children of the needy, defeating the oppressor. And one of the things we've seen in the way in which the government has responded to this crisis is that schooling has been provided for children of key and critical workers. And there's been that recognition that was needed. Verse 12 talks about the importance of delivery for the needy. Again, the idea of help for the afflicted. This idea of those who are afflicted, who are low in society, keeps on coming through. Verse 13, it goes on to talk about pity on the weak and needy. 14 talks about rescue from oppression and violence. I'm not saying that all of those who are classed as key workers fall into those descriptions. They're not necessarily afflicted or oppressed. But there is that sense that many of them, in our normal way of living, don't get the recognition they deserve. And this psalm calls for justice for all. It's a psalm of hope. It's a desire for things to be better, a call for those in authority to do what is right, for those who are struggling and those who feel neglected. A call that is echoed by so many people today. But Psalm 73, which immediately follows Psalm 72, speaks about a different reality. A reality where verse 3 tells us the wicked are still prospering. They, verse 5 tells us, are free from the challenges of normal life. They persist in violence, iniquity, and verse 7 It speaks about evil. Verse 8 tells us they continue to oppress others. And verse 13 and 14 even get to the point where the psalmist is tempted to just do what they did. That doing right doesn't really matter. So Psalm 73 speaks about a different reality. Not a reality where those who are struggling in society are lifted up, but those who seem to have no regard for law, those who just do their own thing, those who act against society in some way are blessed and are doing well. Now, I'm not suggesting that Psalm 73 was written immediately after Psalm 72 and commenting on it. In fact, it's probable that Psalm 72 was written by David as he thought about how his son Solomon would rule after him, and a prayer that God would bless him and make him a blessing. Psalm 73 was probably written much later, either just before the people of God went into exile or after they returned home. But their position next to each other in the Bible does raise questions. And in our society, the question has got to be considered: will the calls for justice and equality actually result in anything? Or, when this crisis is behind us, will things go back to how they were? At least until the next time a crisis hits our country. And what should our involvement be in this? Do we just sit back and wait to see what happens? Do we pray? Do we get involved in some sort of action to call for justice for the oppressed, the marginalised, those who need to be treated better than they have been? What will our response be? Here's some questions to think about. How important is it that the inequalities in our society are addressed? What, realistically, might that look like? Do we really expect things to change once this crisis is over? What can we do as individuals, as church, to influence this?